So what's the best way you can try out that brand new Obamacare medical plan? Well, try hand propping an airplane with the improper technique and you might just get to try out your new medical plan. Now, you may think this is incredibly dangerous, and quite frankly it is, but flying older airplanes, or flying to remote locations where you may wind up with a dead battery in the middle of absolutely nowhere, sometimes hand propping is your only option to be able to go fly. Now, I equate hand propping a lot like sticking your hand inside of a crocodile's mouth. It can be done without anything bad happening. There's certainly a proper, or at least preferred method of doing it. There's certainly some things you definitely want to avoid, and while it may be interesting to those watching, it is almost guaranteed to one day go very, very badly. Now, with all that said, having flipped propellers over 1,000 times myself, I thought I might go ahead and share with you guys some of the techniques I use and some of the things I definitely avoid, and I'm in no way suggesting you ever go try this yourself, but the more you know the better, right? So for starters, what makes an airplane unsafe to hand prop? Well, they're all unsafe, but what makes one safer more so than the other would be A, if it's slightly smaller horsepower or smaller displacement, so it's a little bit easier to hand prop a 65 or 85 horsepower engine than it is, say, a 210 horsepower engine. But believe it or not, you can certainly hand prop those bigger engines as they did way back in the day. The general rule of thumb I use in determining whether or not to hand prop an airplane was that airplane designed to be started by hand, i.e. an old Piper Cub or a Ronca Champ, compared to like a new 172, I probably wouldn't really bother with. Part of what assists with that determination is impulse couplings. When you turn the propeller through and you hear those clicking noises, so as the prop turns and you hear click click, well, those would be 2 impulse couplings, compared to you turn the prop through and you hear just 1 click, like on this Piper Cherokee. That airplane was not designed to be started by hand. And while it can, you better have a really good reason for doing so rather than just using the starter. Next is how you stand next to the prop. So for starters, you got to be on good solid ground and be able to have good footing. So tennis shoes, or even barefoot if your flip-flops are a little too slippery. If the pavement's wet, I'm really cautious about even hand propping in general. If it's grass or concrete or anything like that, I always take my shoes off, especially because I'm always wearing flip-flops. So take my flip-flops off so I'm not going to slip, and then kind of feel around with my foot and make sure there's no sharp glass or anything that could cause me to step the wrong way or kind of flinch. Next, how do you stand next to the propeller? You stand fairly close. This is not the time to be scared of it. If you lean back too far and get your butt stuck way out, your natural center of gravity moves forward and you start hunching into the propeller, putting your upper body, your head, that important part that kind of helps you live and survive, way too close to the propeller. And if you somehow trip or fall, your head's probably going to get squashed like a pumpkin or a watermelon by the propeller. It's going to make a big mess. That's why standing a little closer is actually safer, because you'll be able to stand closer and push away from the propeller, so you're not going to fall into it. You always want to be setting yourself up to fall away from the propeller. So you might have your butt stuck out a little, but not too much. You're definitely not leaning away from it. If you're scared of it, it's not going to go well. Here, Tyler was flipping the prop for me, and I was constantly yelling at him, get a little closer to it. Do not be reaching out and extending your arms way out. You want to have your elbows bent when you're doing this. If you're sticking your arms way out, you're losing leverage. You're probably going to fall into the arc of the propeller. Not going to be a good day for anybody. Next, how do you grab the propeller? Well, you never wrap your fingertips around the trailing edge of the prop. The reason for this is, when the spark goes off, when you hear that click, that impulse coupling firing, we'll talk a lot more about impulse couplings in another video. It's in the private pilot ground school, it's in the commercial pilot ground school. We're not going to waste too much time talking about it right now, but those impulse couplings are what creates spark at low RPM, like when you're flipping the propeller very slowly. So when you hear that click, that's when it's actually sparking the spark plug and going to fire off. Now, if that happens a little too soon, or you get pre-detonation or something like that, it's possible for the engine to run backwards. If this prop starts backwards, that's a whole lot of power turning in the opposite direction very quickly, and it will slice your fingertips off. You do not wrap your fingertips around the prop. Plus, when it turns backwards, your initial reaction is to hold on to it, and then it's probably going to pull you into the prop arc, and you're going to get hit by the prop. Not only will you lose your fingertips, you'll probably lose some other body parts as well. It is totally feasible for these engines to run backwards. Not for a very long period of time, but just a few strokes, just enough to kill you. So I go ahead and stand in front of the propeller where I can push myself away, where I can make eye contact with the person holding the brakes, and I never wrap my fingertips around the back side. I'm standing close enough that I can push off the propeller, and I get a good enough grip just by kind of sliding my hand down and pushing off, so that if the prop does spin backwards, I can push away, step out of the arc, and not have my fingertips ripped off my hand. Now, do I ever hand prop an airplane standing behind it? I don't really like to. I typically use a glove of some sort. I typically try to make sure that my fingers can slide off of it very easily. You're really risking that prop spinning backwards, backfiring. Backfiring is not the proper term here, but basically we'll just call it a backfire where the engine runs backwards momentarily, and where it's going to pull you into the arc of the propeller and pull your fingertips off of your fingers. Typically, I've done that on higher horsepower engines, hand propping things like 172s that are 180 horsepower, but that was really in a pinch, and I just definitely would never recommend ever doing that. Now, let's talk about the most obvious part here. There's somebody else inside the airplane always holding the brakes, and they're competent. They're familiar with airplanes. Typically, if I'm by myself, I'll just find somebody walking around the ramp who's a pilot, private pilot or better, and throw them in, show them here's the throttle, here's the mags, here's the mixture if one's installed, here's the brakes, talk to them a little bit about the airplane, make sure they're comfortable, and have them hold the brakes for me, and then I'll go ahead and slide in the airplane once the engine's running, take the brakes, and then they can hop out. You'll hear some guys talk about tying down the tail or tying down the airplane, chalking it, whatever, and hand propping it by themselves. Totally not okay. The FAA has already established that while there is no FAA established procedure of how to do this, they have established that that is not the proper way to do it, and they will totally ding you for it if something goes wrong and the airplane takes off and hits a hangar or takes off and takes flight on its own, which they have done. The airplane will totally take off and fly without a pilot on board. Kind of a big problem. Somebody always needs to be in the airplane at the controls, ready to pull the throttle to idle, turn the mags off, pull the mixture, hit the brakes, all of that good stuff. Now, the FAA also has some standard phraseology in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge about, oh, mags hot, contact, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. I don't use any of that. I use clear communication because I'm typically hand propping with someone that I may not be super familiar with, so we don't have our own set phraseology between the two of us. So instead, I use crystal clear communication, like, you're holding the brakes, right? And then I'll push against the propeller and pull on it just straight forward and back, trying to move the airplane, making sure the brakes are in fact set. And they say, yes, the brakes are set. And they say, okay, turn the mags to both, or turn the mags to left or right, or whichever one the impulse coupling is installed on. I give clear communication, push the mixture to rich, pull the mixture to lean. And I have never, ever let anyone touch the throttle, ever, when I'm hand propping the airplane. I go ahead and I set the throttle to where I want it, and then they get in the airplane, they hold the brakes, and then I come around. They might touch the mags, they might touch things like the mixture, they never touch the throttle. I'm the last one to set it in the position I want, because I want it to be set for about 800 to 1000 RPM, or even lower than that. I do not want the throttle set high where it could pull the airplane over. Remember, a tailwheel airplane at full power with the stick not held full aft and the brakes held will easily flip over. So bottom line, when you're doing this, be extraordinarily careful. I don't recommend you do this. Make sure that if you do this, you find somebody to help you with it. It's always a two-person job, and make sure they got a lot of gray matter in their head that is functioning properly. Common sense is king here, and the consequences for doing this incorrectly are very, very messy. Now, whether you intend to hand prop an airplane or not, go ahead and share this video, share it on Facebook, subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up. Check out our Patreon page and all the awesome courses online at flyatmikealpha.com, private pilot, instrument pilot, commercial pilot, spin training, crosswind landings, tailwheel courses, all online at flyatmikealpha.com. Go ahead and check out. And remember, guys, if you can't fly every day, then fly at mikealpha.com. We will see y'all next time.